Good evening from Israel, and welcome to another Middle East Forum weekly podcast, Israel Insider, with me, Ashley Perry. As usual, I will be speaking on some of the relevant topics from this week for about 15 minutes, and then I will leave it open for around 15 minutes of questions. I'm going to focus largely on one topic this week, which is probably the most pressing, even though we are in the sort of holiday season. In Israel, we started the festival of Hanukkah Sameach, to all those who are celebrating. And obviously next week it's Christmas and then New Year. So there is obviously still a lot going on, but certainly we're not at the same level as usual. The Knesset even closed today at 4:00, as I wouldn't say it's tradition, but is as the norm. So members of Knesset and their staff can get home in order to light the Hanukkah candles, and then the members of Knesset can go to various public Hanukkah lighting ceremonies around the country. But the big focus, sort of, I would say, boiling under the surface at the moment in the region and in the US is when, what, who of the second phase of the President Trump negotiated ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. And the big questions are, as I said, what exactly is it? When is it? And who is going to be involved? So first of all, let's discuss the when. Basically, President Trump wants it ASAP. He has put a lot of his political and diplomatic collateral into this. He's talked it up as the greatest peace in thousands of years in the Middle East, and he really wants to ensure that this happens, that he is the person who finally brings peace to the Middle East. And he seems to be, and his administration, chomping at the bit to start phase two as soon as possible. What that means is there is a certain level, I would say relatively high level of pressure put on Israel to already not only say that they're starting the second phase of the deal, but also to actually move towards it. What we have seen is more and more statements from the prime minister and those around him saying that we are on the cusp of the second phase of the deal, but no timeline has been given, not by Washington and not by Jerusalem either. What we might see is something more of a timeline, even if it's not necessarily public, at the meeting between Prime Minister Netanyahu and US President Trump at the end of the month. I believe they're meeting in Florida, not necessarily in DC, but that has been classified or has been, painted as a very important meeting where there's going to be a certain amount of, arm bending from the US president towards the Israeli prime minister to say, come on, Bibi, let's get things moving. What are your concerns? Let's just start moving and let's get this going. That's what behind the scenes seems to be happening. Israel will, of course, lay out its concerns, which I'll get into in a little bit. But as far as the US is concerned, everything else is details at the moment. They just want to start moving to phase two as soon as possible. More importantly than when is the what. What exactly is going to happen in phase two? We know what the text is. We know what the 21 points of the Trump ceasefire deal are. We know what was agreed to in the UN. But the question is, what does that really mean on the ground? Because already we see, especially from Hamas, they're saying that we didn't agree to this or we're not going to do it. And the most important element, of course, certainly from Israel's point of view, is the disarmament of Gaza, of Hamas, and basically taking out all heavy weapons from Gaza and attack tunnels, etc. Hamas have been very strident in pretty much every single statement they've made, interview they've made from senior leaders, that they will not disarm. Their arms are part of the resistance. They can't give them up. As long as Israel exists, they will not give up their arms. They're holy to them, etc., etc. We've heard all these kind of statements about their arms. And what that has done to a certain extent, it seems that the US is not necessarily moving away from the concept of disarming Hamas, but what else can be done? And can that be a deal breaker? Can we move forward on perhaps other areas like the rehabilitation, the rebuilding of the Strip, even if Hamas holds on to its arms? There has been talk of not exactly disarming, maybe freezing their weapons, burying their weapons, something similar a lot of people have been talking about, which was similar to the Northern Ireland peace deal, if we remember, brokered by Bill Clinton back in the day, where they talked more about decommissioning. And we're going to hear, I'm sure, a lot more about that word decommissioning in the days ahead, because what it means is not necessarily Hamas giving up its arms. It means it's going to decommission them, put them out of use, perhaps bury them, perhaps put them away. All these sort of fancy ways of basically saying Hamas will still have the weapons, but they won't be as public. They won't be as open about it. And we definitely hear a lot of talking heads talking more about decommissioning arms than disarming. And we've even heard some Hamas, again, it's very hard to detect exactly who's talking what and where, but there have been some suggestions from some quarters of Hamas that this idea of freezing weapons, decommissioning weapons, could be something that they're prepared to do, but certainly not disarm. For Israel, this is the issue of the second phase. This is absolutely central to everything that is expected moving forward. And that really is, for them, that's the central part. The next question about the phase two of the deal is who will be party to the deal, who will be those who will oversee it, who will be those perhaps even putting boots on the ground. So at the moment, we have, I think it's 7 members of the Peace Council, which will be led by President Trump, Egypt, Qatar, UAE, UK, and Germany. But at the moment, really what they're going to be doing is overseeing the rebuild, which is relatively more simple than some of the other tasks. The question about exactly who pays is also a very thorny one. Qatar, who is pretty much the only actor who has the money to really put in the billions or the tens of billions that is necessary to rebuild Gaza, have said in recent days that they're not going to foot the bill for what someone else demolished. In other words, blaming Israel for demolishing Gaza. So they have to foot the bill. I think at the end of the day, Qatar will put in at least some of the money. They want to be a major player, and it's known that the Europeans will put in some money, America will put in some money, but the Qataris are probably the only game in town that are going to put in the billions necessary. But that really is the easy part. The hard part is who is going to put boots on the ground? Who is going to disarm Hamas? Because the idea is the IDF wouldn't disarm Hamas. At the moment, the only party who has said that they will go over the yellow line, in other words, into the red zone, which is run by Hamas. As we know, Gaza at the moment is split up into 2 areas. There's the IDF-controlled part, which is more the eastern side, and the western side is controlled by Hamas, what's called the red zone. And at the moment, all the countries who have said that they will send troops will only agree to send troops to the IDF-held parts, because they basically don't want to get into trouble. They know while Hamas is still running around with their weapons, they and Hamas have openly said, we don't want any foreign troops here. They will put their troops in danger. They know the IDF won't fire on them. So it's a much easier, sort of part for them. And also they can say, well, the more that we get into that area, the less the IDF have to be there. And it could be an easier retreat for the IDF. The only country that has said that they'll go into the red zone is actually the only country Israel for sure doesn't want there, which is Turkey. Because it is depicted in Israel as actually being less than nothing. It's actually making the situation worse. We've seen, Turkey as a major ally of the Muslim Brotherhood. As we know, Hamas is the Palestinian wing of the Muslim Brotherhood. We've seen President Erdogan basically in recent weeks go further than ever before and say that he dreams of the destruction of, as he quotes it, the Zionist state of Israel, and supports Hamas in every way, shape, and form. So to put them in charge or to put them in the red zone of Hamas is just a recipe for disaster, the way Israel sees it. The interesting thing is, while we know that President Erdogan and President Trump do have a good relationship, and obviously Qatar and has a very good relationship with Turkey, a recent conference to basically talk about the deployment of the International Stabilization Force, the ISF, the boots on the ground, where 45 countries were invited. most interesting thing about it is who wasn't invited, and the obvious non-invitee was Turkey, even though Qatar and Turkey tried to put a lot of pressure on the US and Europeans to be invited. Israel stood its ground. They said that this is a red line for us. Interestingly enough, that is a red line that they were not asked to retract, and Turkey was not invited. According to the US at this event, 19 of the 70 countries that they've approached have responded with willingness to assist. But again, what does that mean? Assistance? It could be anything from, sitting in Kiryat Gat, where the ISF is sort of is being hosted, to giving resources, to giving strategic advice, etc., etc. At the moment, it's really not clear who's going to be the boots on the ground. And again, not necessarily in the IDF controlled area, but who's going to be the boots on the ground over that yellow line in the red zone, going to disarm Hamas, or at least going to oversee the decommissioning of arms in the Hamas area. Because without that, really, Israel will not have any sort of confidence that, there'll be any sort of stability or peace to be able to take the steps that they're supposed to take, which is slowly retreating from the area that they control, as I said, east of the yellow line at the moment. I think I've said this before, but I don't think it's any great secret. Israel has no great confidence that Hamas will disarm, and they're just waiting for the US and perhaps the international community to understand that Hamas have no interest, no willingness, no intention to disarm in any way, shape, or form. And perhaps they'll be given a green light to once again go in and do it forcefully. But at the moment, Israel is going along with what's ever necessary, while sticking to its its red lines, whether it is on Turkey or the need to disarm Hamas themselves. Another thing that for Israel is very important is the phase one has not ended, because there is still one hostage body still in Gaza, and that for Israel means that the first stage has not ended, even though they are under, as I said, a lot of pressure to move to phase two. But that's something that Israel is pushing very much at the moment. One challenge to this whole infrastructure, especially from the US point of view, is how much free reign does Israel have moving over that yellow line? Yes, it's allowed to respond to the many, many breaches by Hamas, but over the weekend, I should say, it did something more when it actually attacked over that yellow line into the red zone and took out Hamas leader Raed Saad, and successfully. He's one of the instigators of October 7th massacre. He's one of the few remaining leaders from the Hamas military governing council, and Israel saw an opportunity and took him out successfully, along with one or two other senior terrorists. But it was something that certainly some in the Trump administration did not see kindly. There seems to be a bit of an interesting discussion. Exactly, does the Trump administration see the assassination of Raed Saad as a breach of the ceasefire? And if so, what will that mean? There's been conflicting versions. Some have said that President Trump believes 100% that this was, or senior members of the administration believe that this was a clear breach of the ceasefire, and they are extremely unhappy about it. Others who say, it's perhaps it wasn't the best thing to do, but he was a terrorist, and we can all move on. Perhaps it's more about sort of how different elements within the Trump administration see Israel and see exactly what it's doing. It's not going to rend the whole peace agreement, or I should say ceasefire deal, asunder. Hamas are still interested in it. But it's one thing is absolutely clear, is it was quite an interesting event, because it is clear that the Israel did not inform the US before taking out this Hamas leader. Probably they got a hot tip that Assad was moving around, and this was an opportunity to take him out with very little, if any, civilian collateral. And Israel took that opportunity without informing the US, maybe for strategic reasons, maybe for tactical reasons. But the fact is that they did not inform them. And that is something which certainly isn't seen well within some elements of the Trump administration. But we haven't heard too much publicly. And when President Trump did comment on it, it was really not to make a big deal out of it at all. What we are seeing a little bit more domestically is we are seeing quite a rush towards the end of the calendar year to try and get as much legislation for the governing coalition as possible. We saw today a raft of measures, very ideological, very political, very much in the guise of what this right-wing conservative government want to see, whether it's being allowed to appoint members of a political party to sensitive positions in government, or whether we saw the allowance of Jewish religious practices in the public sphere, which has been a hot contentious issue, certainly before October 7th. But the big issue, which still very much looms in the background of everything that's happening, the ultra-Orthodox enlistment issue hasn't moved forward too much. Again, we do hear snippets of that going forward. It does mean that the ultra-Orthodox parties are still out of the government. They haven't returned to the government, but we did see today the return of members of Knesset from the ultra-Orthodox party voting on some of these measures. Some of them they want for themselves as well, are important for them. Some of them they even put forward. So we're not seeing a coalition as one yet, but we're certainly seeing a movement back by the ultra-Orthodox towards the coalition. But as we know, the most important thing from the point of view of Prime Minister Netanyahu for the stability of the coalition is, of course, the budget. The budget has passed through the government, but that's a government without the ultra-Orthodox. There's certainly going to be some changes, but again, he has to pass it by late March. And I would still say that the enlistment issue is still going to be extremely central to how he's able to bring that forward. Netanyahu seems very confident, and many around him seem very confident that they will solve that riddle. They will pass some sort of enlistment law that's good enough for the ultra-Orthodox and good enough for enough members of his coalition to get it through, to get that 61 to ensure that passes, and then get the ultra-Orthodox back in the government to pass the budget, and then give Netanyahu that breathing space to ensure that he has those more, 6, 7, 8 months towards those, the October deadline for the next elections. So we'll have to wait and see on all those issues. As I said, with the holiday period upon us, things are a little bit slower, but the most important thing that seems to be happening behind the scenes is really when, what, and who of the second phase deal. And with that, I'm going to go to the questions. And the first one we have from Carrie Hillebrand. Do we know what concessions Israel needed to make to secure the multi-million-dollar gas deal with Egypt? I don't think I mentioned that, but I should mention that it was released just a couple of hours ago by Prime Minister Netanyahu, one of his pre-recorded press conferences without media, without questions. Basically, he released that Israel is signing a multi-billion, tens of billions of dollar gas deal with Egypt. This is very important, not just for Israel and Egypt, also for the US. This was apparently, a red line for President Sisi at the moment. President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu are trying to get a meeting between, or some sort of summit, a tripartite summit between Sisi, Netanyahu, and Trump. And Sisi basically wanted this gas deal signed as soon as possible. It comes from Israel's Leviathan gas field. It's not just important from a financial point of view. It will certainly move the two countries closer. It creates that strategic partnership that's necessary. At the highest levels of Egypt, they have no great love for Netanyahu, but they understand Israel's role and they want to play an important role in the region. And obviously behind this is that wider sort of alliance of the more pragmatic Sunni nations led by Saudi Arabia. So in that context, this is seen as a good deal. As far as the concessions, there was some debate exactly whether Israel was getting a good price. Energy Minister Eli Cohen at one point decided to hold off on the deal, and that caused U.S. Energy Secretary, to basically cancel a visit. I guess he was pretty upset about it, but the deal has now gone through. It seems like a good deal for everybody, and hopefully that will get rid of one of the sticking points towards a meeting between Netanyahu and President Sisi, whether it's the two of them on their own or with President Trump. It's not to say that it will definitely happen, but it does. This was one of the sticking points for the Egyptians. So, we'll have to wait and see if that actually happens. Now we have a question from Barak Korkmaz. What is the goal of Rapid Reaction Force? Is it a joint military asset against Turkey? Do you expect a similar move from Turkey? If yes, with which actor? So what Barak is referring to is there's also been talk in the last day or so of a rapid reaction force, 3 countries together, Israel, Greece, and Cyprus in the Eastern Mediterranean, basically reacting. It's not clear exactly what it is, but obviously the Turks will certainly feel extremely worried about it because these are their major regional rivals. Obviously, Greece has been a long time rival, Cyprus obviously as well, with the whole situation on that island, and obviously Israel over the last couple of decades has certainly become a major rival for Turkey. So they will certainly feel a little bit concerned about it. As we've seen from other things, whether it is gas pipelines into Europe, Turkey usually likes to try and respond in kind. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if Turkey try and do something else with some other countries in response to this, in direct opposition to this, because this is something that they will see, even if it's not meant to be a threat, even if it's not meant to be directly in opposition to Turkey, because let's not forget Israel has engaged these countries completely separate to any relationship with Turkey. It's got good relations with Greece, it's got good relations with Cyprus, so it is to a certain extent quite a natural thing to create these partnerships in the Eastern Mediterranean, but Turkey will certainly see it very differently and perhaps more of a threat. So JL asks, is anyone talking about the elephant in the room regarding the so-called peace agreement? It's not going to go anywhere like previous so-called peace deals for a variety of reasons. First of all, it's not really being called a peace agreement. It's a ceasefire deal. Yes, President Trump is talking about, in the way that he likes to, this is going to create peace for thousands of years. The Israelis are under no great illusion that this is going to be that, unless, and this is the big question, which seems to be moving further and further away at the moment, whether we are going to have this grand deal that was talked about throughout the war, that a ceasefire would then lead to agreements, normalization with Saudi Arabia, with Indonesia, with other countries, acting against Iran, etc., perhaps even reverting to this, India to Europe sort of pipeline or transportation corridor, whatever it is. If that happens, then yes, it could be something extremely big. But at the moment, really on the ground, we're not necessarily talking about peace deals. Certainly, we're not talking about anything on the level of an Oslo or Y agreement or all these other previous ones. It is being played down in certain quarters specifically because they don't want to go down that road once more of claiming this is going to be a grand peace when actually the reality might be very different. So it's not being called anything more than a ceasefire, really. Although, as I said, there have been, statements out of DC that this is the grandest peace of all. And we have a final question again from Carrie Hillebrand. What are the chances that Israel receives the body of the one remaining hostage? Will Israel agree or be pressured into agreeing to phase 2 without return of the body? It's a good question because, yes, they are being pressured to move on to phase 2. Hamas do seem to be looking for the body. Again, we don't know exactly if their intention is to retrieve the body or they're just pretending to look. We don't know. I've heard all different things. Some say that his is specifically a very difficult body to find. Others who say Hamas know where it is, it could only be in one or two sites. They have been digging. Part of the reason that has been given, ostensibly and in actuality, why the search has halted or at least been suspended, is because the weather. We had last week, we had Storm Byron, which was quite a major storm, and certainly certain areas of Gaza were flooded. Certain areas of Israel were also flooded, and it certainly made searches, of the type to retrieve the bodies of hostages very, very difficult. So there is a certain amount of that. There is a pressure on Israel to say, okay, yes, there is one body out there, and we'll still put pressure on Hamas and other terrorist organizations, perhaps Islamic Jihad, know where his body is, to retrieve that body, but we shouldn't let that get in the way of moving to phase two. Israel is trying to make the point that Hamas haven't fulfilled their part of phase one, but there is a lot of pressure, even from the Trump administration, really to try and say we shouldn't let one body of a hostage to hold up this process. And we have one last question before we go from Ali Al-Mariati. I do not expect Hamas as an organization with military, political, and social presence to cease to exist in the Gaza Strip in the foreseeable future, especially given the international support that helps sustain its presence. In this context, my question is, given the presence of international powers, is it possible for Israel to continue its airstrikes targeting both old and new leadership? Well, I think the type of targeting that we saw of Raid Saad this week, I think that was relatively unique. I don't think we'll see it again. There is one remaining high level, I can't remember his name, so don't push me on that, of the military governing structure. I'm assuming if they got good intelligence on them, maybe they would alert the Americans this time because of the discontent over the assassination of Saad. But I think on the whole, Israel is not going to be striking beyond the yellow line unless it's in reaction to breaches from Hamas, which we see almost every single day. And the Americans expect that, understand it, and support Israel's response. But any larger airstrikes beyond that, I think, again, if there are any, it will be a singular event here or there. Again, if Hamas has a major breach and Israelis die, as we saw in the past, then the Americans will give Israel a freer hand to react. But the type of assassination that it did over the weekend, I think really we will probably not see too much of, because America really wants to move to phase two. It wants this ceasefire to hold up as much as possible. And they see that too many attacks by Israel over the yellow line into the red zone, attacking Hamas, is going to put that at risk. And that's something the Trump administration certainly do not want to see at this point. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your participation and for your questions. And I wish you all a happy holidays and a good night from Israel.